So we will start the morning session, and we have a pleasure today to welcome Professor Ramesh from the University of Berkeley, and he will talk about electric field control of magnetism.
Thank you, sir. So I must have been really stupid for more than one reason. I forgot my glasses. If you look at me, if you see me doing this, I can't see very well. No, you can't give me your glasses. So that doesn't work. So apologies, but it's a little bit off skew. It's midnight my time, so a little bit strange. The second more important reason is 2 times I didn't come to this workshop. And so I'm saying, how stupid can I be not to come to this wonderful place? So I don't know if you guys already did this. Vincent and the organization team have done a fantastic job. With beaches like this and the layout, 100 people sitting in a room with no light, listening to... That must be saying something about you guys. So let's begin by giving Vincent and company a big round of applause. Thank you very much. At least for me, this is you know, for those of you who know me, my day job is very different. I'll tell you a little bit about it as we go forward today. But I'm really furiously back into science. And for people who know Ramesh, I only know 2 states, zeros and ones. And so I'm in the 1 state right now. So science is a lot of fun. And for today and tomorrow, I'm hoping you take some of it away. So I designed this particular talk to be a little bit more exploratory, not controversial, but perhaps there is some controversial stuff. The goal today should be not to finish my slides, which really means it should be interactive. So how many of you guys were by any chance at the DPG meeting in Dresden? Huh? Okay, so you can go to sleep. No, not fully, a little bit, but the talk will have the same flavor. And if I spoke too fast in Dresden, then I will try to slow down. Okay. So the goal today is going to be very applied. Unlike some of the talks you've heard over the last few days, it's going to be a little bit more applied. And I did it for a very specific reason. If you look at the field of oxide electronics, this workshop, or the IWOE, all the other workshops, we are always the materials of the future. That's a problem. The standard rule in any technology development is that 2 to 3% of your gross money comes back into R&D. If that gross is 0, you don't have funding for R&D. And so we are continuously, as a field, moving from one topic to the other. Started with high-TC, it was a small market, it's not a huge market. But high-TC tapes and wires are working pretty well now. Then ferroelectrics took off as a market, but not huge markets, you know. Hundreds of millions of dollars. It should be hundreds of billions of dollars. So that's a problem. CMR happened the same deal. If CMR had worked at much lower magnetic fields, they would have become technology, so on and so forth. And so for older people like myself, time is not infinite anymore. We have a really short window to make an impact. So the first part of my presentation today will be very much focused on markets. It's something that you will never generally think about, or you'll not even scratch your head about. So I'm going to talk about this top down. Okay. There is one slide I didn't put in here because it's a little bit intensely controversial. It has to do with competitiveness. We will just talk about it. Okay. So if you don't like these kinds of discussions, you can snooze for a while. Then we will come back and we will try to do some physics on this. Okay. So the other title I should have put there on this slide is Global Markets to Spin Orbit Coupling. That's what we're going to try to do today. Go all the way from huge markets. How does one think about these from that perspective? And slowly go down all the way to how do I control spin orbit coupling at the microscopic scale. Okay, and with that, the goal is to see if you can get to an attojoule per bit. I'm going to give you some reference points in a second. So that's kind of the outline I've settled on. And we're going to focus initially on Moore's Law. How many of you guys have not heard of Moore's Law? Good. Dude, really? Okay. So I will give you a quick snapshot. So Moore's Law, let's get into it. So this is going to be the outline of what we'll talk about. So if you look at microelectronics, this is an important slide. It looks like a picture from Google. It is. So, but if you look at what has happened is the following. If you look at global market, the semiconductor broad market, microprocessors, memory devices, etc., typically people think of it as a $300 billion market globally. And that's how people program. But over the last 10 years, a whole bunch of things have happened that are dramatically changing that market scene. So one of them is this notion of IoT, Internet of Things. So if I wanted to stop your car, if somebody is driving your car, I can stop them from here, no problem. If every building, new buildings typically, has millions of sensors, so I can control every thermodynamic variable, almost control every variable. But each one of them requires a chip somewhere, a semiconductor chip. So because of things like there's a smart hospital, smart city, highways which are very highly controlled, factories where manufacturing is very highly controlled, the size of the semiconductor market, which is at core driven by Moore's law, we'll get to it in a second, is now about 20 times larger. Because people think by 2030, that market will be about $5 trillion from $300 billion. Okay. So then the question is, what does that do? That says that competition globally is very important. And that's something that we'll come back to in a few minutes. Competition between companies in various countries. Competition between countries is now very important. Energy markets are very large markets. Globally, we consume about 15 terawatts of energy at $1 a watt, it's $15 trillion. So energy markets are huge markets. And therefore, there's a lot of competition going on between US companies, European companies, Chinese companies. So in the last 1 year, there were some dramatic developments that happened in China. And I want to give you one as an example to tell you why the US is very worried about this. Not worried, there's competition. No, we should be worried. Let's not laugh about it. We should be sweating at this point. The reason is the following. About 3 years ago, in 2013, the fastest computer in the world at that time was a Titan, which I oversaw when I was at Oak Ridge National Lab. It was the fastest computer. And that year, there was an announcement from China where they built a computer that was faster than Titan, about 30% faster. And it was built with Intel GPUs, graphic processors. Okay. Everybody said, fine. The US government told Intel, you will not sell anything to China. And he said, thank you very much, no problem. They invested $150 billion, not million, dollars to build their own semiconductor fabs. And in June of last year, 2016, they announced that they had built the fastest supercomputer in the world, which was 25% more energy efficient. Energy efficiency is very important. If I have to have today's computer, the Oak Ridge machine, for example, takes about 30 megawatts of power. Very power hungry. So if I have to have an exascale computer, I basically have to have a nuclear power plant right behind the exascale computer. So energy consumption is a big deal. We're going to come back to that again. And therefore, this announcement in June of last year shook up everybody, mainly because it was built completely with indigenous parts. Semiconductor, microprocessors, everything was built in Wuxi in China. Okay? And therefore, Washington has been sweating. People around the world, people are in the strategy business, people are in Brussels, for example, are worried about how the market share will go. Now, like solar market, 90% of solar manufacturing now happens in China. Okay. It's very likely significant changes will happen in the microelectronics market, given that the size of the market is about $5 trillion. Okay. And therefore, innovation is very important, but manufacturing is important, making it at very low cost. Energy innovation is going to be very important. That's going to be one of the focal points. Okay, so this just completes the picture. Now, let's spend a minute on Moore's law. Moore's law is a techno-economic theory. Okay. From about the late 60s to literally today, this law has been holding good. It basically was, Gordon Moore was the founder of Intel, and he said every 18 to 24 months, the critical dimension, which is the metal line width in a CMOS transistor, becomes half. Okay. There's nothing fundamental about it. It was mainly a pathway to push engineers to innovate, and Intel engineers are very innovative, so they kept on pushing. It's been okay. But when you go from 80 nanometers to 45 to 22, everything is fine. We're now at the 7 nanometer node, and actually nobody makes it at 7 nanometers. They call it 7 nanometers, more like 13 nanometers. Now you're getting to dimensions which are very close to fundamental atomic dimensions. You're not looking at continuum mechanics anymore. You're now having to look at discrete mechanics. You have to involve quantum mechanical ideas into understanding the performance of a transistor. And that's a fundamental problem. So there are 3 pathways that can overcome this law, this Moore's law. One, of course, which says, hey, I'll go completely into quantum computing. There's a whole bunch of people who are doing that. The other one is to do neuromorphic computing. A lot of parallel processing, and oxides can play a big role there. The third one is to go look for pathways by which you can stretch the time constant for the death of Moore's law. Did I give you a good enough answer for Moore's law?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So basically, it's not a quantum mechanical law, it's nothing fundamental physics. It just simply says, hey, you will reduce the dimension. So it led to lithography, led to etch processes, led to better measurements, etc., etc. Okay, so all these microelectronics are embedded in the background. Okay. So that was kind of a 10-minute overview as to why we're looking at this problem from the macroscopic side. There's huge stakes in this. Okay, and this one captures the energy part of it. So this is a chart which came from this report. It is a little bit of controversial chart because there are people who argue about the nature of this curve. Okay. So let me take you through that a little bit quicker. If you do nothing today we are somewhere out here. If you do nothing today to Moore's law, meaning I don't do any more innovations in terms of the energy consumption or the cost per chip, all of those things. And if IoT happens, and IoT will happen. Keep in mind, Internet of Things does not require 7 nanometer or 3 nanometer CMOS. It requires a lot of 45 nanometer. Much of them are run-of-the-mill CMOS chips, but you require a lot of them. This is the projected trajectory of the energy consumption. And you can see, this is the number that you need to focus on. This is the number that you should go back. If you're a student in this business, let me go check out what Ramesh was saying. These are still back of the envelope calculus, reasonably credible. But what it says is if I don't do anything to CMOS, it's approximately 100 picojoules. People will argue the heck out of each other about this number. Maybe it's 50 picojoules per operation, per logic operation. But after order, picojoules, then by 2030, you could be consuming 20 to 23% of primary energy. Primary energy means I take some gasoline, I burn it, that's the primary energy. I don't convert all of that into electricity. I only convert about 1/3 of that into useful electricity. So that's an important number. That then becomes an important metric. Today we are at 4 to 5% of primary energy, which means nobody gives a big word in microelectronics. But if data centers like Google and everything, all of IoT happens, then you're going to be looking at a much bigger number. And therefore you say, I need to do something to reduce this somewhere here. So one pathway is by doing something Pavel talked about yesterday, negative capacitance. And we were talking about that after his talk. Negative capacitance is already, where's Pavel? Pavel's right there. Negative capacitance is already given about 5 to 10 years of new life. Going from 60 millivolts per decade to even 50 or 40 gives you a lot more room to play with. It's already given people like Global Foundries, Intel, time to do more innovation. So if you can do that, if I can reduce it from 100 to about 20 picojoules, then you can reduce it by a little bit. But the goal is there a new law, Moore's law, which is at 20 femtojoules per operation? Keep in mind it's per operation. A logic operation has many components. There's the actual, doing the flip-flops for the logic. There's communication. There's getting information in and out. Turns out a huge amount of energy is just running current through wires. I squared out. So if I want to hold it to about 8%, we need to get a femtojoule. So we're saying, why not look at what are likely the limits? We're still not at the limits. What happened when we start to look at the limits of this? Okay. So So I now want to give you two calibration points, and the second one is a little bit goofy. I'm going to argue that if I want to look at very low energy processing, you're better off using electric fields, and this is the rationale for that. The first part of it is just CMR, colossal magnetoresistance. The second part of it is a figure that I need some help from you guys. My colleague at Intel and myself have been working on this, but we will talk about it in a second. Okay, so basically this is CMR. This is data from the original paper we published. That's the manganite, calcium manganite, metal insulator transition with a magnetic field of 6 Tesla. It's here. Electric field of 400 kilovolts per centimeter. It's here, and both of them add together. And this is something you've seen. We should not spend much time. I can then extract the colossal magnetoresistance and the colossal electroresistance, and then say, let me try to understand the fundamental physics, just a very basic physics. So now I go from being a condensed matter physicist. Condensed matter physics says 6 Tesla, approximately 9 Kelvin. No big deal, very low energy scale. If you were an engineer on the other side, 6 Tesla meant that you lost all your money. You can make no money with those kinds of energy scales unless you're actually creating a magnet which creates 8 Tesla. Why is that? Because if let's say I just do a very simple Ampere's law. I have a wire and run a current through it to generate a magnetic field of 6 Tesla at a distance of a micron from the center of the wire. I need a current of about 30 amps. And 30 amps is a bad number. 30 micromilliamps is already bad. We're going to talk about it in the next slide. So you now understand where the problem is with things like CMR. It will never make money. You can do fantastic science, you can publish science, Nature papers, PRL papers, but you will never make money. That's because of this problem. Now let's look at the other side. And there's a very simple thing which it seems very obvious, but it wasn't really very obvious. It is the fact that if I now look at the electric field scales are the dimension of the object. For example, if I had to apply this 400 kilovolts per centimeter in a 100 nanometer thick film, it's 4 volts. Very easy to generate 4 volts. We're going to come back in a few minutes, maybe half an hour, and say, look, I don't want 4 volts, I want 400. I better say I want 100 millivolts. Now, if I had a millimeter size sample, all of a sudden you have to go into 40,000 volts. That's shocking. That's too large. And therefore, you can see that because the scales of dimensions, so we're going to be looking at very small objects, nanostructures and stuff, you're better off using electric fields to do that, if you can actually do what you want to do. Now, this is the more controversial part. Our spin colleagues are probably going to kill me, but I want to get killed. I want to know how to think about it better. So Sashi, who is this really smart engineer at Intel, he and I have been going back and forth trying to capture this energetic at a more fundamental level. So, for example, if I have voltage-driven magnetoelectric switching, I could think of the energy, the fundamental energy, as something like half CV squared. And you can think of pathways by which you can get to an attojoule. We think we have already a good pathway. If dimensions are all okay, if it get to 10 nanometer kind of dimensions, you get to an attojoule, 10 to the minus 18. On the other hand, if I look at STT type processes, and this is where feedback from you guys would be very valuable as to what's missing in this logic. It scales, each electron can only carry 1 Bohr magneton of so you intrinsically require a large number of electrons to carry. So you can get to the order of 10 femtojoules, maybe push it somewhere. So there is potential to innovate in this space, or there's a big difference in terms of the energy consumption. Okay. This is something that we should be thinking about. How does one start to think about magnetic fields on this side, electric fields on this side? Okay. This is a summary. By the way, I forgot to mention, as I'm getting more and more into multiferroics, clearly I'm going to use examples from our work because it's easy to cheat. But really it's a work done by a whole bunch of people. This slide is an important slide because there's a nice review, not necessarily the cutting edge review, but it's a most recent review that you may want to check out. They have a good list of references where they cite other work. And so what does this talk about? This is talking about what are the various pathways by which I can do electric field control of magnetism. By now I'm hoping that you said, oh yeah, I got it, as to why electric field is a better pathway than magnetic field. So you can manipulate the magnetic anisotropy, and I'm going to show you some examples of that. You can manipulate the coercive field, which is approximately the same as this. You can manipulate the magnetization. There's some fantastic work done by Manuel Vives and Ines Barthelemy in the Thales group. Beautiful work. And Ryan, who used to be a student there, is now with us, etc. I'm going to spend some time on this, so we'll come back to it. Of course, you can manipulate transport, you can manipulate the transition temperatures. All of these have been demonstrated in some form or the other. But as we go through this talk, we're constantly going to go back and forth from being a physicist, what I can dream, to being an engineer, where I have to be very practical. So you have to go back and forth. So you can't afford to go to 77 Kelvin. You have to be very robust at room temperature. You have to be very low energy consumption at room temperature. You have to be within a manufacturable process. You can't use uranium, plutonium, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot of constraints that will be put on you as you go through this. Then you say, having seen all of that, how do I create a device that will actually work? And we think there is a finite pathway, at least intelligence. Okay, we're now getting more and more and more into the physics. I want to use this slide to explain something which is really important, and this is mainly for the students, so the professors know all of this. About 12 years ago, we created nanostructures, and I didn't give you the full background. Think of a cigarette box, and a lot of people here smoke. Think of a cigarette box where you have two phases. One phase is a cigarette, the other phase is the air. You have an ordered array of cigarettes sitting in a rectangular box. So we created a nanostructure where you can have 20 nanometer type pillars of a ferromagnet or a ferrimagnet epitaxially embedded in a matrix, which is a ferroelectric. That matrix is all of these brown regions, and the dots you see here are the 20, 30 nanometer type pillars. These are magnetic force spectroscopy images. I'm putting this slide up for a very important reason. It has to do with fundamental symmetry in nature. Okay, so the experiment, and we've been doing this for about a year, and we didn't see the kind of data we were looking for. And the experiment that we were doing, we were magnetizing it, and so you can see all of these dots are white, meaning they're all magnetized out of plane this way. And we came in with an atomic force microscope, applied an electric field, we said switch it. And then at that time, the thinking was, oh, I'm switching the ferroelectric, and therefore it should switch. What happened repeatedly was that half the white dots became black dots. But on an average, I had, after the switching, half up, half down, on an average. You do it 100 times, you got approximately 100. So that doesn't make sense. At one point, it became very clear to us that this had to do with the fact that if you're switching magnetism, the direction of magnetism, you have to be able to break time symmetry. Otherwise, the data is not very clear. And therefore, when that dawned on us about 12 years ago, 2005, 2006 time frame, we said, oh, I just need to break time reversal symmetry. We applied a very small magnetic field, much smaller than the coercive field of the ferromagnet, typically 20, 30 oersteds of that sort. Immediately, we switched it completely. Okay. By applying a field in the opposite direction, I can completely suppress it too. Why is this important? Because as we go through, if you're going to be using electric field, which doesn't break time symmetry, obviously, to control something which is magnetic in nature, you have to be really careful about this. Therefore, in terms of interpreting your data, you have to be very, very careful. So keep that in mind. So that kind of, you can't violate time reversal symmetry. If you're only manipulating magnetism, if you're doing this, it's okay. But if you're going from this to this, you have to be very careful. You can manipulate, meaning you can wiggle it by simply changing its anisotropy a little bit. Okay. Okay, now we get into a little bit more of the details. Vincent, has BFO already been done?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we can go through very quickly then. I will not spend much time except to motivate my own part of this. So you've seen all of this. I think this is the kind of the poster child system. The reason it is the poster child is because all of its ordering temperatures are very high, which means there is a finite chance that you can actually do something. And the other reason that this is such a fascinating system is, I thought we were done. We started this work in 2001. Perhaps Manuel's group and us, we started about the same time, even earlier, 2000, at Maryland. we thought we were done, so in 2013 I said, okay, I'm not doing BFO anymore. We are fully back to BFO now, because there's so much fun stuff. There's some stuff that is coming out almost on a daily basis from our lab. There's a lot of new discoveries being made. So I gave this example at the DPG meeting. It looks very much like a Bollywood movie. How many of you guys haven't seen a Bollywood movie? You know what we should do, Vincent, the next time, right? On your Sunday break, you should just screen all-day Bollywood movies. You get samosas and tea, and you have Bollywood movies. It completely clear out your mind. Okay, the reason Bollywood movies, I don't know how many of you haven't seen it clearly, is they always have this, you think that the movie is over, there's a fight scene is done, then there's a dance sequence where they're changing bulbs and stuff. So you say, okay, it's done, then there's a big crying sequence, etc. So BFO is very much like that. You think, okay, we understand everything, there's something more to this. But clearly, I won't cover all of this. But let's get back to the details. G-type antiferromagnet, which you saw already, that's the 111 plane. The spins are ferromagnetic in the plane, antiferromagnetically coupled out of the plane. And because of Dalezhinsky-Moria coupling, there's a small canting at the moment. That canting now is becoming a very important. That canted moment there is a very critical player, as you will see in the next few slides. Band gap 2.6, which means it's very optically active in the visible. Nail temperature very high, of course TC is very high as well. So there are a lot of things that I will not cover here, assuming that you've already heard. In the first 5 years, the biggest controversy was the polarization. When we measured it, we were getting polarization values of 90 microcoulombs per centimeter squared. The previous bulk value was 6 microcoulombs per centimeter squared. So the first 2-3 years, we were beating the crap out of each other, saying, oh, you're wrong, back and forth. It turns out it is indeed 90. It was also the early days of using ab initio computation to understand the fundamental properties. It was the early days of understanding what happens when you have correlations. Now our theory colleagues are really adept at this, but in those days, I remember one MRS meeting where Jeff Neaton, who was Karen Rabe's postdoc, Nicola, myself, and my students, we started arguing about this at 9 o'clock at night. We went on till 4 o'clock, and I was completely drained, but these guys were talking about the polarization lattice, the Berry phase formalism, and we were like, dude, what's going on? We had never heard those terms in 2001. Now it's very common. If you don't use correlations, all our theory colleagues talked about it, BFO comes out to be a semiconductor with a very small band gap. You have to put in the correlations to get the band gap of 2.6, 2.7. This is a very complicated system in that sense. From a ferroelectrics perspective, it's relatively well behaved. The polarization is pointing along this direction. Okay. So the first question we're going to ask is, if I switch my ferroelectric polarization, this is a little bit complicated picture, but let me take you through it. The white arrow is the polarization. The red arrow is the canted moment that we saw before. The orange is the antiferromagnetic L vector. They have to be this right-hand screw. P along 111, L and M. The L is typically in the 111 plane. Let's pick the 110 direction, or 11 bar 0 direction. And the M, the canted moment, is perpendicular to it, is 11 bar 2 direction. That's how you can think about it. That's not always a given, because I can change it by applying some strain to it. I can change it back and forth. So if you look at the early theory papers, they talk about an easy plane of magnetization. So the magnetization can rotate everywhere. So the question that we're going to ask, and this was a very controversial, it's still people hacking back and forth, is what happens when I switch my polarization from here by 180 degrees going this way, will the canted moment change? The original work by Nicola Spalding, who will come next week and talk about, I don't know if she's going to talk about it, but something like this, was that nothing should happen to the M, because that's simply a symmetry operator. If my M is in the plane, switching polarization should not do anything to it. Now, Jorge Iniguez, amazingly smart guy, and I love working both with Jorge and Javier. Tomorrow we will talk about Javier's work. But he said, no, maybe there is something different. Let's think a little bit about it. These are the other two switchings. These are the symmetry operators for the Ramesh1 stuff. So that's the question that we're asking. I'm now going to show you Jorge's work. Now, Jorge's, about 5-6 years ago, this is 2010, he said, maybe Nicola and Claude Edward missed something. He said the what happens to the canted moment will depend very much on how I took this through the process. That's the other thing that we learned about bismuth ferrite, and we'll get back to it in just a second. I'm kind of stepping ahead of myself. So what did Jorge do? He basically took the structure, the crystal structure I showed you, and he said, let me do a 71-degree switch, which means I go from 111 polarization direction to 111 bar. That's a 71-degree rotation. And what he found was, that's the energetics of that. Let's look at these two parts. The bismuth ion shift, clearly the red is basically the Z component, and the blue and the blacks are the X and Y components. This one changes sign, but these two don't. But what he found was the octahedral rotation, which is directly related to the magnetism, the canted moment, changes sign for the Z component, but not for the X and Y. That was, and so Jorge's claim was that, hey, you have to look at all states. And he was saying, and he was telling us, I'm saying, dude, I don't know if I believe this, but it took us a while, but all of our experiments were telling us that Jorge was right. You can go for the 109-degree switch. I'm going to finish up with the 180-degree switch. You can see X, Y, and Z, all of them are changing. And he found that doing this process was much more easier than by doing this. So the message there was this switching of the polarization by 180 can be accompanied by a 180-degree switch of the canted moment, depending on how it goes. And therein lies something very interesting, which I would not have believed, having been programmed to think about ferroelectrics in a certain way. The standard way of thinking about it is that the ferroelectric switch were what is known as a Vanderbilt switching mechanism. Meaning, as I switch my polarization from this to this, it slowly reduces the magnitude of the dipole moment, and then it flips over. Okay? Unlike a ferromagnet, if I did the same thing with a ferromagnet, where I can't ostensibly change the magnitude of the ferromagnetic moment, so instead I rotate my magnetization, either a black wall or a needle wall. But bismuth ferrite was telling us, and we had seen data, that the polarization did not go through the Vanderbilt switching mechanism. Instead, it was rotating the polarization. We were like pulling out our hair saying, that's very strange. But it does that. And we have a lot of data now which points to that. So that was a big kind of a difference in how these things behave compared to conventional thinking. In tomorrow's discussion, we're going to talk about this again, talking about skyrmions and vortices and stuff like that. So let's hold off on that. Okay, so you can now go back and say, this is a kind of a loaded slide, so we'll take some time on this. Let me now make model systems, and our model system is one which looks like this. This is basically the piezo force spectroscopy image of a sample which is very deliberately grown on a substrate, in this case dysprosium scandate, which has only certain kinds of domains. And it's simply to ease our thinking process. So these stripes are basically ferroelectric domains which are 71 degrees apart. So they're domains which are pointed this way and this way, actually, 71 degrees apart. That's the only domain that's allowed. It makes our life simpler. That's the piezo force spectroscopy image. I can now put a very thin layer of a ferromagnet and say, what happens to the magnetic moments in the ferromagnet? And it turns out that this is the image of the ferromagnet captured using photoemission electron microscopy. We'll talk about this quite a bit more detail tomorrow. We use circularly polarized X-rays. Those are, so the helicity can change depending on the sample. A ferromagnet will actually give you differential absorption. And this is called X-ray magnetic circular dictation. We'll go a little bit more into the detail tomorrow. But what we found was that the magnetic domains in the ferromagnet, the cobalt iron, mimic the ferroelectric domains. And he said, there's coupling between ferroelectricity and magnetism. Absolutely not. They don't couple that way. You're not cheating on quantum mechanics. But what is happening is that that canted moment we talked about actually is projecting this way along this axis. The net canted moment in the system is projecting. So if you remember about 10 minutes ago, I said that the canted moment is very important player. It's a small value, very important player. Next few slides are going to talk about that. But the key is that now we know that there is coupling between something in the bismuth ferrite, and it is not the ferroelectricity, it's the canted moment that is coupling. And you can go back and simulate it with various models. This is OOMP-based, object-oriented I'm not blanking out on the names. The M part of it. It's basically doing large-scale simulations of this. This is from Saif Salahuddin's group. And the coupling energy is of the order of 50 volts. Okay. So I can summarize the coupling between a ferromagnet, in this case is a very canonical ferromagnet, cobalt iron, and the bismuth ferrite at the bottom, like so. These are the domains that we talked about. The projection of the polarization is like so. So what looks like 71-degree domains is actually projecting as 90 degrees on the 100 surface. The projection of the canted movement is also 90 degrees, and the yellow is the antiferromagnetic cell vector. This is what we know, or we think we know, about the canted movement. So there's a net in-plane moment in the ferromagnet pointing this way. So the question we're asking is, if I switch this by 180, will this switch? And so I'm going to show you some data which says, yeah, very likely it does. So we've seen all of this already. You saw this picture. This is another way to image magnetic domains. Scanning electron microscopy polarization analysis, very similar to using X-rays to image the magnetization. You can indeed do vector mapping on a microscopic scale of what happens to the magnetic moment in the sample. Okay. The experiment that we did, which got published in this paper a few years ago, was a very difficult experiment because we had to repeat it 3-4 times, and getting beam time on synchrotrons is very difficult. The experiment was to take an island, and this is by a few microns. You can see barely the metal contacts. We wanted to image it in the as-grown state, look at what the magnetic structure was, and then come back, electrically switch it, and see what happens. That's the experiment. So initially it's the black state, for example, with the X-rays coming in this way. When you switch it with -5, it became essentially white with some remaining regions. You switch it back, it goes back to the black state. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's the device structure that we were using. You can rotate the sample or the X-rays for that matter, and you can image the stripes. Indeed, you can see that the magnetism is switching by 180. That's all outlined in this way. Okay, very good. You can go back and do other measurements. I'm going to focus for the next 5 minutes or so on other measurements. You can go back and do the ferroelectric hysteresis. This is now a real test structure. That looks like the red. By the way, much of this data is reasonably resonant between the Thales group. We have some differences in, I think it's mainly because of samples, etc. But overall, our conclusions are the same. And so, Manuel is not here, but we will speak for both groups. So I'm just using data from our group because it's easy to know that. I don't have to go running around looking for data. Now, what John Heron did, he was a student of mine. He's now a professor in Michigan. What he did was to build a spin valve. And the spin valve is now going to be important, as you will see in the next few slides. We built a spin valve and said, can I manipulate the transport through the spin valve? This is current in-plane spin valve, by applying an electric field. And what he showed was, indeed, you can do this. You can get the hysteresis loop, which is about 1.5% or so change in the resistance, which is approximately what you expect. So it was all good. The fact that it's coinciding with the ferroelectric switching was very interesting. I want you to take away 2 things from this. One is the fact that these voltages are still 4 volts, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And of course, the fact that you could do it a few times. When John did it in 2011, 12, 13, he could do it maybe 10 times, and invariably something happened, the sample burnt out. We've made quite a bit of progress on that, and I'll talk about this in a second. The other way to measure it is by using ferromagnetic resonance. And this is a technique that, I don't know, did anybody talk about FMR? Yeah, so it's a separate talk by itself, but what we were doing is, you can set up ferromagnetic resonance in the ferromagnetic layer and ask the question, how does it change when I apply an electric field? And typically you will see changes in the position of the resonance peak. And you can manipulate that with magnetic fields. Of course, in our case, we're using electric fields. So you can see the FMR resonance line shift is of the order of 8 picovolts. Ideally, you want it to be an order of magnitude larger to be really useful in application. But you could see that it was quite robust with 100 cycling, and it was going back and forth in hysteresis. You can extract from this by using time-dependent Ginsburg-Landau models. You can extract the direction of the Cantor moment. And it says that it switches approximately about 180 degrees. And it overlays very well on the ferroelectric switching. All of this is telling you the imaging experiments, the spin valve experiments, all of them are saying that when I switch my ferroelectricity by an out-of-plane electric field, the Cantor moment is going from this to this. It's switching by 180. Okay, let's summarize here. When I switch my polarization from this to this, that's going from that to that. So to do that, I'm going to lay the foundation for a device that Intel is working on and give all credit to this guy. This guy, Sashi Manikatuni. Dmitry Nikonov and Ian Young are two Intel fellows. They're the ones pushing this. And the device looks like here. It has two components to it. There are challenges on both sides. There are challenges for people like Bernard Vienney and Professor Faird in terms of Rashba effect, Rashba-Edelstein effect. On the left side here, you put in a charge, you convert it into, you do something, some operation, then you convert it back into, there's a spin-orbit coupling stack, or the inverse Rashba-Edelstein effect stack, which then converts it back into a charge. That charge is going to give you, hopefully, an output of the order of 100 millivolts. Keep in mind, this is all theoretical calculations. Actual data shows of the order of a few millivolts, maybe 1 to 2 millivolts. How to get that output signal from here up to 100 millivolts itself is going to be an interesting challenge, not trivial. Okay? We're assuming that our spintronics colleagues will do that. Okay? So this device called a MESO device, it's a magnetoelectric spin orbit coupled device. It's really a test structure to explore various things. And if you look at this paper, which is on archive, which is already, people have fought battles already on this paper. This is a very highly debated paper because essentially all calculations, there's no experimental data. And we're now trying to do the experiments to validate it. Okay, so that is a big challenge by itself. How to get to 100 millivolts output? We said, we're not going to worry about it. We'll assume that you'll get 100 millivolts. What else can we do with this? On this side, we have the magnetoelectric stack, which is what we are working on. It says if I have 100 millivolt input to a magnetoelectric, like this one ferrite, can I switch ferromagnetism on the other side? That's kind of the experiment that we're shooting for. Which really means we need to be able to switch something with an electric field maximum of 100 millivolts, which even in the ferroelectric division, nobody has done it. And therefore, if I can simply do the ferroelectric part, it is an awesome accomplishment. We're going to get to that in the next few slides. Okay, so let me summarize what we know. If I have to get to an added Joule switch, what are the things that I need? Okay. This is going to be kind of the Bible slide in some sense. If you're going to be doing research, I seriously urge you to focus on this. You don't want a huge polarization. You want enough polarization, but not a huge value. That is also true generally in ferroelectrics, but as your dimensions become smaller and smaller, it becomes more important to have a higher polarization. 5 microcoulombs would be good. The coercive voltage is by far the toughest one. You want to have 100 millivolts actually even lower, because I should be looking at the maximum voltage, so that's an issue. Magnetoelectric coupling should be high, which is why it's red and pointing the other direction. Of course, device dimension, we're assuming something that will be of the order of 10 by 10 nanometers. So what are the big questions? Stability is clearly one of them. Scaling and phase transitions. We're not as worried because there are no fundamental phase transitions at the 10 nanometer scale. Signal margins depends on this for sure. Limits on coupling strength. I think this is the one which is going to be the killer. The interface between the ferroelectric oxide, and if you're going to use a ferromagnetic metal, you're going to have problems because that's typically a Schottky barrier. And lots of crazy things. So the entire physics of polarization fatigue in ferroelectrics that we solved 25 years ago was by using oxide electrodes, for example. That's going to show up here again. So there's a big challenge for all the people doing materials physics, new materials, in terms of what is that ferromagnetic metal. Okay, so I'm going to now take you very quickly, not meant to be exhaustive. This is work done actually at Oak Ridge with Sergei Kalinin and Peter Maximovich, showing that you can go all the way down to a few unit cells. This is four unit cells of bismuth ferrite. It is still ferroelectric, but you can see that the coercive voltage, hip bias at least is not the coercive voltage, is not changing dramatically. The coercive field going as T power minus 3/2 is a problem in ferroelectrics. Nobody has been able to show something which deviates from this behavior, the so-called K-Dunn law. I think this is really important to focus on. It comes down to nucleation growth of reverse domains. On the magnetic side, we know that the antiferromagnetism is quite robust, at least down to 5 nanometer thickness, tens of unit cells. And that's X-ray magnetic linear dichroism, which measures, in some sense, the strength of the antiferromagnetic order. It says that it is stable around to about 5 nanometers or so. Then it starts to get suppressed. This data also has exchange bias coupling to a ferromagnet, and they both say the same thing, that indeed antiferromagnetism is relatively stable down to at least a few nanometers. Now in the last 6 months, 8 months, we've been focusing on this question of how does one get down to 100 millivolts of switching. Not at all trivial, I can tell you. We spent 20 years in ferroelectrics. Nobody ever asked us to do this. So we've been trying to do a few things. I'm going to summarize that. One is, obviously, I want to reduce my thickness. We went from 100 nanometers. We're now playing with 10 to 20 nanometer thick samples. By itself, it's a materials challenge. We have to make high quality materials. So the thing that we see, both by reducing thickness and chemically doping bismuth ferrite, in this case, we put lanthanum into it, typically about 10 to 15% of lanthanum. How do you take bismuth ferrite, which is a very hard ferroelectric, large polarization, and soften it up? And in the PZT literature, that typically is done by putting zirconium into titanium and making it go towards a morphotropic phase boundary, making the material softer and softer. We're trying to do something very similar here. And about 8 months ago, we saw some fantastic data which we've now been able to reproduce, where this is very slow switching. Keep in mind, this is not the dynamic switching that we are used to. It's very slow switching. And we saw switching of the piezoelectric behavior. This is the phase of the piezoelectric response at about 150 millivolts. Okay, which you said, oh, this is pretty interesting. It was saturating around 300, 400 millivolts. So we've been focused on trying to understand the behavior of these kinds of samples. It does switch quite well in the dynamic mode. This is half of 500 nanosecond pulses. We can switch it by about 600 millivolts. We think we can get down to about 500 millivolts quite easily. How to get to 100 millivolts, not obvious. If anybody knows, this is really important in terms of the progress. It's a grand challenge as far as I'm concerned. It's not trivial to do that. Okay, so let me skip this. We've already talked about it. I showed you this data already. We know for sure that we can switch these guys with very fast pulses. This is 50 nanosecond switching of a 20 nanometer thick sample at about 500, 600 millivolts. We can do that. Will it go down to 100 millivolts? We're not sure. That's really the challenge space. And again, we also know that the magnetoelectric coupling happens very quickly. By the way, the dynamics of the magnetoelectric coupling, both within bismuth ferrite and coupling to a ferromagnet, is still not well understood. There are not too many measurements. This is a very rich space. If you can do ultra-fast measurements, that would be valuable. This is measurements at Intel. Again, this is still not nanoseconds, keep in mind. This is of the order of 20, 30 microseconds. This is our anti-parallel for the plus 6 volts versus minus 5 volts. And you can see that they flip sign. That's about the difference in the resistance for the two different states for the GMR, about 2%. And you can see it flips. So it says that in principle, we can do this with short pulses as well. The last piece of it, and this is where we are, we don't know beyond this point, is the fact that at 20 nanometers with lanthanum doping, very strong coupling still to a ferromagnet. This is the ferromagnet on strontium titanate substrate. On silicon, we see even stronger coupling. We think that's purely because the domain structure on silicon is very different than on these oxide substrates. This is something that needs to be understood because at the end of the day, most of these devices are going to be made on silicon. So we need to be worrying about what happens in the domain structure. Okay, what are the open questions? This is perhaps the most important slide. How do I increase Dalijinsky-Moria interaction? Good challenge, not obvious. And we'll finish up with some suggestions for tomorrow's talk. is it strong enough, or is the nature of the coupling good enough? What is the role of the ferroelectric antiferromagnetic ring structure? It's not trivial to image or look at the antiferromagnetic order. You can use linear diffusion-based measurements. Perhaps the most difficult one is the Schottky barrier between the cobalt ion and on the oxide. Therefore, the biggest challenge is to have a ferromagnet that couples to the bismuth ferrite at room temperature. We know LSMO will couple. We have a lot of data on it. We know it will not couple at room temperature. It will couple at 100 Kelvin because the Curie temperature of LSMO is only about 380 Kelvin. So you need something that looks like iron oxide but which couples very well. Spinels are not very good because of very large lattice mismatch of the perovskites. They start to facet. Spinels love to facet. Therefore, the surface quality is no good. We have a lot of defects at the interface. That's a big challenge. If we can get a ferromagnet, we're now working, trying to see if there are other ferromagnets that we can look at this kind of problem. So that's an important requirement. So we need an oxide ferromagnet that couples to BFO from temperature. I think the whole business of phase equilibrium in bismuth ferrite yet to be, a lot of things to be done there. And so we'll go on. Okay, I want to make a transition to a different multiferroic. Philippe talked about this yesterday in his theory-based talk. I'm going to show you some experimental data. So before we get into this stuff, I want to maybe click to the next one and then. So we have looked at BFO. We have done quite a bit of diligence. We said we understand quite a few things about BFO. We understand the polarization response. We have done all of the different structural variants, etc. We understand reasonably well how it couples to a ferromagnet. You can switch magnetism in the ferromagnet with an electric field. At room temperature, I showed you some data about how Intel is progressing towards trying to make a real device. A lot of challenges still there, but that's what you guys need to be fixing. We say, okay, is there a totally different way of creating a multiferroic? One of the big problems we have is there are not too many of these materials which will function at room temperature. Remember the early part of the talk we talked about, it needs to be room temperature, low energy, low cost, etc. Make a lot of money, all of it. So about 2 years ago, Dallas Sloan, who does exclusively MBE, and his student is now my postdoc, and that's how I got involved with it. So this compound, lutetium iron oxide, is a very controversial compound. In 2006, there was a paper. Let me see if it's here. Yeah, this paper, the Ikeda paper. They claimed that there was a ferroelectric state based on pyroelectric measurements. They claimed that this compound broke inversion symmetry, and therefore it was multiferroic. Okay. A lot of back and forth, and some people said, oh no, they were doing magnetocapacitance measurements, whole bunch of back and forth. And other people claim it is non-polar, that's this paper. It is definitely magnetic with a nail temperature of or ordinary temperature of about 240 Kelvin. The 113 compound, lutetium iron oxide, on the other hand, is a canted antiferromagnet with a nail temperature of about 140 Kelvin. It is ferroelectric at a very high ordinary temperature. This is, Felipe was talking about improper ferroelectrics, right? This is a good example of that. The primary order parameter here is a structural geometric order parameter, and the ferroelectricity is kind of the dependent order parameter. But you can already see where it's coming from. This up, up, down, up, up, down. That's the source of the ferroelectric polarization. So Darrell was thinking, can I now start to use these with all the power of epitaxy? Can I now start to create artificially engineered superlattices? I'm going to show you some data on this. This has now become a very interesting topic for us. I'll tell you why in a few minutes. So basically we have grown over the last 2 years or so a whole bunch of them, hundreds of different variants of the superlattices. This we call the 124, the 113 layers. These are the various sequences, m to 1. M equals 1, 5, 10. I'm going to focus on this 9 just because it's the one that gives most measurements. What we see is that this is calculations from Craig Fenney, is that the magnetization per iron actually scales with this Q parameter. What is this Q parameter? The Q parameter is this distortion. I'm going to come back to it again. That's the kind of spontaneous distortion in the crystal. It seems to scale with that distortion, which says that there's some coupling through the lattice. Okay, so summarizing magnetic properties, we can indeed get good ferrimagnetic moments. The moment is not small. If bismuth ferrite, for example, had a moment of 50 EMU per cc, we're wasting our time. If there is a pathway to take DFO and get 50, 50 is approximately what you need to make something really practical. The canted moment is about 6 EMU per cc. Therefore, it was an order of magnitude larger. That's the end game. And if it couples and all the other things, then that's what you want. Now, this moment is significantly larger than bismuth ferrite. And you can see it has all of the metrics. The TC for this 9, M equals 9, is about 280 Kelvin. So already we know that the TC of the 124 phase is higher in the superlattice compared to the bulk. That shows you how the QD temperature is changing. And the moment is also, it doesn't follow the rule of mixtures. There's something which is nonlinear about it. Okay. Now, we talked about this Q factor. This is atomic resolution microscopy data, and you can see that the 2 up, 1 down actually shows up in a real image. It's not just in a schematic, and you can see the 2 up, 1 down. From there, you can calculate the polarization, which is in pretty good agreement with theoretical calculations. This is DFT simulations. It shows about 3 to 5 microcoulombs per centimeter squared. In terms of polarization, this is actually a good value for the system. Okay, now to find out about the ferroelectric order. It's not that easy to measure the ferroelectric order. We're still making device structures and stuff like that. But we can use, again, X-rays to probe ferroelectric order. In this case, we're measuring the linear dichroism, which is a good measure of some structural asymmetry in the system. And this one is for the 9 to 1. You can see the in plane, X-rays polarized this way versus this way. There's a difference of the order of about 20-30%, very robust. And this is now for the 1 to 3. That difference is smaller. And again, it's telling you that indeed this one summarizes the dichroism data. It shows the phase transition from the ferroelectric state to something which is non-ferroelectric. M equals 9 goes all the way because the TC for that is almost the same as the 113 phase. Okay, all good. And the polarization from STEM is of the order of about 3 to 5 microcoulombs per centimeter squared. The experiment that we did, which is where I got in quite deeply into this stuff, is trying to understand the coupling. And the fair answer is we don't know much about the coupling yet. Okay? We don't have a model which shows, hey, this is how the coupling happens. So what we've been trying to do is the old-fashioned way, repeat experiments more and more, and try to understand what we're seeing. So what we've done is to write patterns, in this case just using atomic force microscopy, switch the polarization up and down. And this took us a while because we don't have bottom electrodes yet. We just got those electrodes done. So we had to remove the substrate, put contacts, etc. Those are very stable. This is after about 4 days, 5 days worth of testing. You can see those patterns still are stable. We have now checked them several months after writing them. They're still very stable. So it doesn't look like these are just surface charge modulation. It is indeed switching the piezoelectricity. Now this experiment took us a long time to do. It took us about 9 months to do this experiment, where we wrote this pattern and went back and imaged the magnetism using, again, circularly polarized X-rays, looking at absorption of the ion edge. And what we saw at 200 Kelvin very clearly, barely there, not there around room temperature, is that we saw the same pattern. It seems to suggest that we have switched the magnetic moment in the superlattice from up to down by applying the electricity. How this happens, we still are not sure yet. We're still trying to figure out the details of how this coupling is mediated through the lattice. We're not sure yet. The next question was, if you're practically say, okay, if I believe all of this, how do I just do this about room temperature? We now have a pathway. I'm not going to show you all the data because we need to, I wanted to discuss one more topic before I finish up. We now have a pathway to get to well above room temperature by changing the 124 layer. We know how to do it. We have to do this coupling measurement. This is a little bit of a pain but we have to do it. We're in the process of doing this magnetoelectric coupling measurements that I showed you for the So a lot of open questions, but what I wanted to do is to pause for a second and point out that this has now become, if you can do the rich person synthesis, which is MBE, you can now open up a totally different parameter space. I can go in and microscopically design, like what Felipe was talking about yesterday, microscopically design both the ferroelectric and the ferromagnet, the ferrimagnet part. But then ask the question, how do those couple? No, I don't think that's trivial. I don't think in our paper, this paper, we understand it completely. This is very, very open question. Okay, that's kind of the summary for this. The ferroelectric puckering, the up, down, 2 up, 1 down puckering, seems to somehow couple to the ferrimagnetism. I don't think the lattice is involved. That's going to tell you the dynamics of the process, how fast can you go, etc. Okay, last few minutes. We spent a lot of time today, an hour or so, discussing electric field control of the direction of magnetism. And we started by saying you have to really be careful about time symmetry, spatial symmetry, and those kinds of things. I want to spend a few minutes on another aspect where can I change the state of magnetism? Can I go from an antiferromagnet to a ferromagnet? Can I go from a ferromagnet to a paramagnet by applying electricity? What are the things that we can do? Again, this is something where Manuel Vivas and Barthelomy's groups and us, we were literally on parallel tracks. Ryan Sharifi, who did that work with Professor Pierre and Manuel, he's now a postdoc with us to continue this work. So the model system we've been looking at is iron rhodium, which undergoes this metamagnetic transition. It goes from a ferromagnet at high temperatures to an antiferromagnet at low temperatures. And it's right around room temperature, about 360, 370 Kelvin. So we've been working on this, trying to understand how to control this back and forth. Again, the data look very similar. We took more of a transport pathway. Manuel and company took more of a magnetism pathway, so the conclusions are relatively the same. So I'm going to summarize 2 sets of data on this. The first thing is that when you put a thin layer of this ferromagnet or antiferromagnet iron rhodium, you can put it on a piezoelectric surface. We don't know how to put it on a multiferroid surface yet. For some, chemistry is very important. So to grow the iron rhodium on an oxide surface itself is relatively complicated. I can modulate the coupling now by more than one mechanism. In everything we talked about in the last hour, we were talking about exchange coupling as a pathway to control magnetism. That exchange coupling is the pathway by which you broke time symmetry as well. In this case, we're saying we don't care about time symmetry because I don't care about this way and this way. I just want to go from one state to the other. So I need to manipulate some other interaction in the system. That interaction in this case is simply going from here to here, is simply manipulating the internal interactions between the iron and the rhodium. So what we've been doing is to use transport measurements coupled with magnetic measurements. What we find is that this is on a piezoelectric surface in the PMNPT crystal, basically. That when I switch it, you can see the dotted lines are basically the strain in the PZT. You can see very large strain. That's a switching. It's about 2 to 3 kilovolts per centimeter is a switching field for the crystal. You could see very large changes in the resistance of this. So it is quite possible, I'm going to show you more data here, it's quite possible to change the resistance of this material, this is a metal, by about 20% distance. You say, why did that happen? It happens because it's going from a ferromagnetic state to an antiferromagnetic state. Spin-dependent scattering is changing. You're also changing the mesoscale distribution of the ferromagnet phase and the antiferromagnetic phase. And it's just temperature dependent because this happens right around the transition temperature of the system. You can put it into the 2 states, the 1 state and the 2 state. They're very stable, which says that this is indeed fundamentally changing the material from one ferromagnetic phase to an antiferromagnetic phase. We don't know if it's completely doing it. We think it's only doing it partially. So the big challenge for us, which we're trying to figure out, is how do I go from a complete ferromagnet to a complete antiferromagnet. Maybe the lateral dimensions have to be changed to try and figure that out. Okay. Okay, I can skip this. I've already shown you this in the previous slide. So we've done a whole bunch of measurements which showed that indeed I can put it into one of these states. For example, I can magnetize the iron put it into the one state. I can come in, and this is the magnetization response. I can come in and apply voltage. I can go back and completely hide that magnetic state. So Javi Marti, very smart guy, is in Prague right now. He was with us for a couple of years. He had some really crazy ideas of making invisible memories. Memories that you can program it into a state, apply an electric field, it'll go into an invisible state. You cannot see it anymore. Then you come in and apply the opposite electric field, you can start to see it again. So this is one way to encrypt your memory in some sense. So we have done this, and it seems to work pretty well. We still don't understand much of the details of what are the microscopics of how the antiferromagnet or the ferromagnet go into each other. I'll skip this. So the last slide before I shut up today has to do with what we started the game with. Said, okay, can I go from global economics to spin-orbit coupling? The essential feature in the bismuth iron oxide story was the spin-orbit coupling, Dalajinsky-Maria coupling leading to the Canted moment. I said a few minutes ago that if the Canted moment was an order of magnitude larger, and if it did everything else, we have the perfect material. So the question is, how does one make material where I can microscopically change the nature of the Canted moment? One way is to do chemical substitution. You can put a species there which contributes a larger Canting angle, not as easy. One way maybe is to try to apply strain to it, and we tried. Both Manuel's group and our group, we've been looking at bismuth ferrite on other substrates. We can make it undergo phase transitions from a rhombohedral structure to a supertetrahedral structure. And we know that if I now relax that supertetrahedral structure, you have a mixed phase structure where you have the rhombohedral phase and the tetrahedral phase coexisting. And the rhombohedral phase in that mixture has a much higher moment, about 5 times larger moment, but it's not everywhere, it's only microscopic areas. So there is a pathway by which you can microscopically play games with the Dalajinsky-Maria. That can be valuable. So this is basically just a one-slide summary for tomorrow's discussion, which says, hey, can I now go in and create polarization vortices? Imagine a scenario that where I had bismuth ferrite, and instead of my polarization vectors all being uniform everywhere, I'm now rotating my polarization. Pavel talked about this yesterday, but we're going to go quite a bit off the deep end on that discussion. And imagine that happened in bismuth ferrite. We don't know how to do it yet, but imagine you could do that. Then maybe because there's internal coupling in the system, maybe the antiferromagnetic sublattice will also follow that, and therefore I'll have a spin vortex as well. Maybe that's a pathway by which we can change the nature of the Dalajinsky-Maria coupling on microscopic scale. So this is basically the kickoff point for tomorrow's discussion, where we will talk about why vortices form, what do we know about them, what do we not know about them. So let me summarize what we have done so far. Even more than ever, I think this business of multifluoroids, I include the Thales group, us, whoever else is working on it, we don't have infinite time anymore. We need to get on to do stuff which is practical. Something needs to translate from science, nature to a real application, which means somebody needs to make money. Which is why I spent so much time today trying to outline the nature of the markets and stuff. Unfortunately, in all of these devices, and microprocessors is a different market. Many of these are very commoditized. Very difficult for new technologies to compete in commodity markets. I've spent a lot of my time in the last 6 years thinking about how markets evolve. Very difficult for a new technology like multifluoroids to break in, unless you have an Intel pushing it. Intel has a lot of power to show it because they have resources. Or you have a niche application where nobody else can compete and you can enable something. But what we have shown so far, the community, not just us, is that you can indeed switch the direction of a magnetism robustly at room temperature by applying an electric field. Can we do it at very low energy scales? We think we can. We're not fully sure. This is something that over the next year or so we will show up. How much of energy consumption per operation? We want to get to an attojoule. If everything we see pans out, if we can get to the same kinds of energies that we see at 100 nanometers down to maybe 10, 20 nanometers, we think we can indeed get to 1 attojoule per bit of operation. Intel seems a lot more confident than I am at this point. We don't know much about the dynamics yet. I didn't show you data, I should have. I'm happy to show it to you. I didn't put it into my talk. We know how the switching happens in EFO. We don't know much about the dynamics of the process. We spoke a little bit about the MESO, the magnetoelectric spin orbit coupled system. This has two big problem areas, not just one, both on the inverse Rashba effect and the multi-toroid magnetoelectric part. But the field, I think, is very interesting with people like Intel now taking us a little bit more seriously. I think we all need to get together. The people who are working in this field, we need to talk to the Bernardinis of the world. These guys know how to make devices. Now, the Grenoble group, I think, is very important. Like Intel, the Grenoble group is very important because they know how to take physics into EE space, which we need happening. So stay tuned, be engaged. If you're a student, this is an interesting time to get into this business. New materials are coming up, like we talked about, the new multi-ferroics and stuff. So there's a lot of exciting things going on in the business. So thank you so much, Vincent, for the chance and questions.